Welcome back. The Thabo Mbeki Foundation has stirred a hornet's nest with their provocative and timeless questions raised about how the ANC is dealing with the land question. The central premise of the argument advance is locating and resolving this question of land within the ANC's principle of non-racialism, and of course which is codified in the Freedom Charter that says South Africa belongs to all who live in it, both black and white, and that the land belongs to all who work and shall be shared amongst all who work in it. Now, the view from the foundation says that the ANC has departed, or rather the foundation says that the view has departed, the ANC has departed from it at its National Congress when it adopted the resolution around land expropriation without compensation. The debate issue, of course, is a thorny one, and to unpack it, we are fortunate enough to be joined by Dr. Barney Pichana, who is, of course, an independent consultant for the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. Dr. Pichana, welcome to The Fix.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
And then, of course, we've got Professor Adam Habib, who is, of course, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of the Witwatersrand. Adam, good evening, Professor. Welcome to The Fix.
Thank you for having me.
Peter.
Don't ask me to. I don't understand this paper, right? I mean, this is so Thabo Mbeki. It's very thorough, it's very deliberate, it's very thoughtful, and at the end of it, when I'd finished it, I kind of thought, what did he want the result of it to be? What did he want to do? Did he want to step in the way of a process? Did he want it to be just privately circulated as a discussion document? I can't understand. I get what he's saying. He's basically saying, you did something that breaks a long tradition here. And, you know, I'm sure there are 300 different arguments around the same thing, as there was, Barney was mentioning it a moment ago, a very nice piece in the City Press today, basically saying, you know, Pixley Sema might have said what Thabo Mbeki says he said, but he also said a whole lot of other stuff. Yeah. Much more Africanist than what has been quoted here.
Well, we've got someone from the Thabo Mbeki Foundation here, Dr. Pichana. What do you think was the aim of the pamphlet, as Peter correctly says, and what do you think former President Thabo Mbeki wanted to achieve by, you know, penning such a document and putting this in, you know, the mix?
The discussion document is designed to be that, a discussion document. In other words, to try to, as it were, to lift the level of debate about a very important issue of land distribution and land reform in South Africa, and the urgency thereof. Because it seemed since the conference and since the land parliaments traveling around the country, it seemed like the discussion was being fixated, if you like, in a very particular way, and was. It
was discussed in a very factionalized conference, anyway.
In that particular way. So the intention was to do two, if not three things. One, to invite the ANC to take the leadership. Secondly, to invite the ANC to recognize the extent to which it was very, very important for the ANC to remain and to refine its own historic positions, even as the circumstances are changing. For example, 1994, the new constitution and all of that. And efforts had been made. And the most worrying thing since December, as far as some of us are concerned, has been the absence of the voice of the ANC and the leadership of the ANC in a very, very emotive debate in the country. For example, since December, one would have expected to have had the ANC producing a roadmap to say, how are we going to be able to bring effect to that which National Conference had presented? What are the time frames within which it is going to be done? What do we expect to be the outcomes thereof, both as a leader in Parliament and as the government of the day?
Professor Pichana, let me just cut you there. We'll come back. I want us to take a listen quickly to Paulo Jordan, one of the ANC's theoreticians, if you like, debating with Adam Habib, Professor Habib, earlier on 702 with me on this matter. And of course, he was extremely emotional about it. I understand he has tempered his issues, a little bit. But let's take a listen to what he has to say.
No, I think this pamphlet is rather unfortunate because it has not enriched discourse on the matter at all. Perhaps it distances the Thabo Mbeki Foundation from the incumbent leadership of the ANC, and it even dares to suggest that the incumbent leadership of the ANC has adopted the PAC's position, or at best the EFF's position. Now, I find this strange because in the preface of the pamphlet we see on page 1,
yes,
speaking as members of the ANC.
Yes.
So the author or authors see themselves as members of the ANC.
That's, of course, Paulo Jordan from the African National Congress taking issue, saying that the paper is saying this matter is not a principled issue and it was done and raised, so it is a question of strategy and tactics. Professor Habib, you were in the debate with Paulo Jordan. Do you agree with his central premise that this document doesn't actually help us in addressing the debate that we are currently having in the country about land?
So look, I think that the debate until now has been very emotive and actually racially factionalized. And I think that that's something that we should be worried about. And I think that what Thabo Mbeki's document does is try to elevate the debate in a more thoughtful direction. And what it says is that the ANC has largely been reactive to the debate. It's been reactive to the EFF. It's been reactive to a tradition that stems from the PAC. And that, in a sense, it's violating its own tradition of non-racialism. Now, in that debate, what Paulo Jordan said is he quoted the Morogoro Conference. And he said that the Morogoro Conference had identified a much more radical tradition and had said that the land issue must be addressed, particularly because surplus land is in the hands of robber barons. Yeah. Now, here's the issue. If you want to go after robber barons, they go after robber barons. And that's the class question, because what you'd be doing is people who are sitting on land for speculative purposes, you can take that land. And by the way, the Constitution allows you to do that. But what the debate as it now plays off as, in the public discourse, and even by some of the leadership of the ANC, it creates the impression that any white person with a house or with a shop could have this thing completely expropriated without compensation. That's racializing the debate, and it's saying we're going to treat white citizens differently from black citizens.
Which is not what the motion at the conference in December said at all. Doesn't mention race.
No, it isn't. But the discourse that has played out has played out in a particular way, in part because instead of giving leadership to this question, you're allowing political parties, which are much smaller, to lead this debate, and you're reacting to them. And I think that's the big fundamental challenge, and I think the Mbeki document is trying to address that and say, let's take leadership of this issue.
Peter and Professor Pichana, I want to ask both of you this question. What do you think is at the root of the ANC's inability to provide leadership, to be as reactive as Adam has said? Is it because there's no center, or is it because the president isn't able to impose his authority on this and he's reactive? Let me start with you, Peter.
Yeah, look, I'm not. A couple of months ago, I would have gone with the lack of authority. I'm not sure that that's the case any longer. I think he's stronger now than he was a couple of months ago. I think he has a way of doing things that is just a way of doing things, and you know, he keeps saying nobody's, you know, there are going to be no land grabs, we're going to do it sensibly. He's got a now, you know, an almost grotesquely sensible panel of people advising him on it. I think we're just dealing with Cyril, actually. I mean, it's the way he's going to run the country. He's going to do it quietly.
Professor Pichana, the preface of the document, as we can see there on the screen, says that we are ANC members. We're discussing this as ANC members, right? Is there a lack of centre that is holding in the African National Congress? Is that a driver for the fact that this debate is just all over the place and that the ANC is actually not providing leadership?
So essentially, there is a state of atrophy on key policy questions in the ANC, in part because the originators and the drivers of different types of policy are associated with a faction. And this policy is associated with a particular faction. And therefore, in the context of the politics of the ANC, President Ramaphosa and those who support him are very, very conscious that the positions that he was represented did not support this at the conference itself.
No, they didn't.
They did not support this at the conference itself. And yet, they have this responsibility to bring about a solution to this problem. So that's a reality of the politics of the ANC. But having said that, I think that could have been overcome if President Ramaphosa, as President Ramaphosa, not as a leader of a faction, had actually driven the ANC to say, come together. Let's come together. Let's make this thing. How does this thing work? Because the people out there, they want a clear operational position to say, how do we operationalize this? And I think if they had done that very, very alone, to say, this is how we as the ANC are going to give effect in operational terms. These are the time frames in which it's going to work. This is our timetable for Parliament. This is how we're going to see what went wrong in the previous dispensation and how we can fix it going forward.
They would have avoided this entire mess.
This whole thing would have been avoided.
Adam, I see you picking up your finger there. You want to respond?
No, I think Barney's right. I think that what you have is a president who has to respond to a policy resolution at a conference
that he
didn't entirely agree with. However, having said that, what I think he's bureaucratically done as a president is found a sensible way to do this. He's put a great panel and said, now you will determine an agenda. But what he's not leading on is on the narrative. So you've done bureaucratically what needs to be done. But you haven't done the political leadership that takes charge of the conversation. So what you've got is a disconnect. Bureaucratically, you're doing the right thing, but the debate is being led by a bunch of guys who are completely at odds with what the bureaucracy is actually engaging.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge I think you see.
So his political advisors are the people that are failing him.
Yes.
He's not, I don't know who they are, but he's not being told, Mr. President, you've got to speak to this issue.
There needs to be coherence.
We need this kind of message. That audience needs to know something. That audience needs to know something. He's got two big summits coming up. He's got a job summit and an investment summit. Both of those are going to require that he says something more specific and more concrete about what to expect in respect of the land issue.
As we're sitting here, the African National Congress's NEC is sitting. And word coming from the conference, by the way, and I understand former President Zuma was there again, sitting very lonely, figure joined by Stumo Dlamini at some point. But the word coming from the NEC is that the president is putting his foot down on narrative and saying, we've got one message, we must stick with that message, because obviously all of this happens in the context of the toughest election that we are going to be facing since the democratic breakthrough in 1994. Is this an attempt, even though he doesn't support it, but is this an attempt to undercut the EFF? We saw the stats coming from the the Institute of Race Relations. I'm not always confident about these stats, but they predict a sizable growth for the EFF. Professor Pichana?
Well, my point, actually, I think that's a media narrative that this is going to be the toughest election for the ANC. I actually think it is not. I think the ANC needs to be a lot more confident about what it's doing, about its policies, more clearer than it is doing. The reason I can say that, I actually still think there is no opposition that is in 2018 that is posing any kind of threat.
Yes.
Yeah, whereas in 2016, many of us, after the local government elections, actually expected a much tougher opposition than there is in 2018, because the so-called opposition and
is in disarray themselves.
Are in disarray.
Chaps, we've got 1 minute left. I want to give both Adam and Peter an opportunity. So 30 seconds for you, Adam.
Very simply, I think that he is trying to say I need to take charge, a single narrative. But the single narrative can't be on the other things alone. It has to be on land. And he doesn't have to do it himself. No. He can simply say, here's what I expect the NEC to speak on. Here's what we are saying. And by the way, let's get this clear. All that the Institute for Race Relations is saying is there's going to be potential growth from 6% to 12%. With due respect, even if they're right, why is a 62% party responding to a 12% party and allowing them to determine the narrative?
Peter, you have the last word.
That's the thing, you know. I mean, to get to 12%, by the way, what Julius has to do is find an extra 1 million votes. That's roughly what it is. So between 2014, when he first got into Parliament, and 2016, the local government elections, and all of the fuss and all of the performance in Parliament and all of the publicity, they managed to get less than 100,000 more votes in 2 years.
Well,
so
gentlemen,
he's got a long way to climb.
Well, gentlemen, and it's not as if the EFF's house is in order either. As you said, Professor Pichana, the ANC has the gift of weak opposition. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Professor Pichana, of course, independent consultant from the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, and Professor Adam Habib, professor at Wits and also Vice Chancellor at the university there. Thank you so much. We are, of course, still ahead going to be speaking on our expert panel, some of the shocking revelations that we heard from the Nugent Commission of Inquiry this week. See you after the break.